Greetings, everyone. This is Live Life Well TV host Robert Landau. We are here with another episode of America's Greatest Personalities. This episode, we're going to take a bird's eye view of some of America's greatest comedians, but greatest comedians from the golden age of comedy, comedians from yesteryear, when funny was funny. So stay tuned. It was the great Milton Berle that once said, "I live to laugh and I laugh to live." Milton Berle was suggesting then what we now know as fact, scientifically proven fact, that laughter heals. Laughter is an incredibly powerful healer. Scientific studies do prove that laughing each day as much as you can not only heals the spirit, not only heals the mind, but the body as well. And we all know that for something to be funny, there needs to be comedy or a comedian around in some shape or form. That's a given, right? America has produced some amazing comedians. But yesteryear, America produced some astoundingly amazing comedians. We're going to take a look at the golden age of comedy. What did all the great comedians of yesteryear have in common? All were discovering what their passion would be at a very early age during their childhood. Most ended up being discovered. Marx Brothers' mother, the Marx Brothers' mother, ended up discovering Jack Benny. Milton Berle and Bob Hope both discovered that they had comedic talent when each entered at a different place at a different time, Charlie Chaplin look-alike contests. The great Ed Wynn would end up discovering Red Skelton, while Red, as a kid, was selling newspapers in front of a local vaudeville theater where Wynn happened to have been appearing at the time. The road that these wonderful comedians took from being a no name to being a big name was very similar. Vaudeville, then to radio, then to television, all the while doing live gigs and also doing, in most cases, film. That, combined with faith in knowing that someday they really, really will make it big, became a perfect combination for these great comedians. Times were different back then. So tell me, what great comedian I'm talking about. This great comedian's TV show was so popular that it was the only show not canceled to make way for presidential election coverage on the very night that Harry S. Truman upset Thomas E. Dewey. The only show not canceled that night, because if it had been canceled, the election probably wouldn't have taken place. Here are some words from his book, and I quote, "In Detroit, an investigation took place where the water levels in the local reservoirs took a drastic drop on Tuesday nights between 9 and 9:05 p.m. He goes on to write, and it's a he, "It turned out that everyone waited until the end of my TV show before going to the bathroom." It's Milton Berle. And it is widely believed that Milton Berle single-handedly led the entertainment revolution that got the nation hooked on something that is in your living room and probably in your bedroom, which I believe happens to be the most powerful programming tool ever known to man: the television. Many say that Berle was the most famous man in America, not the most famous comedian. Oh, yeah, he was that, but the most famous man in America between the late 1940s and 1950s. And here is another amazing fact. Life magazine once reported that in 1947, there were 17 television stations in the USA broadcasting to 136,000 television sets. 17 television stations broadcasting to 136,000 television sets. Once Uncle Milty was on TV, only 1 year later, there were now more than 50 television stations compared to the 17 just a year before. And get this, 700,000 television sets in our homes compared to 1 year prior, just 136,000. As far as television ratings went, Berle's show had a viewership of 80.7%. 80.7%. Think about that for a moment. Berle's nearest TV show competitor at the time had a viewership of 28.9%. Why was he such a success? Well, he was funny, and he didn't have to resort to cheap theatrics or innuendos to get people to laugh. Here are some of his lines. He once said, "The company accountant is shy and retiring. He's shy $250,000, which is why he's retiring." He also said, oh my God, is this still true? You can lead a man to Congress, but you can't make him think. True comedy is timeless. He also said, in Washington, a man gets up to speak and doesn't say a thing, and the other men disagree with him for 3 hours. Berle also once said this, "A doctor recently told me that jogging could add years to my life. You know what? I think he was right. I feel 10 years older already." He also said, "I met my wife at a dance. It was actually so embarrassing. I thought she was at home with the kids." And finally, he once said, "What's the difference between an Italian and a Jewish mother? The Italian mother says, if you don't eat what's on that plate, I'll kill you. The Jewish mother says, eat everything or I'm going to kill myself." What great American comedian am I referring to next? And I'll give you one hint and you will get it immediately. She had red hair. Yeah, you got it. In 1927, Lucille Desiree Ball was all of 16 years of age. And it was at that time that she enrolled in something called the John Murray Acting School for the Dramatic Arts in Jamestown, which is upstate New York. Full of high hopes, young Lucille had all of them dashed in not one, but two heartbreaking ways. Here's the first one. She was literally told that she had no hopes of being an actress at all. Can you imagine going to drama school and that's what you're told by your teachers? But the second one is even more intense. There was another student in Lucille's drama class that kept stealing the spotlight from her. Would you believe it was Betty Davis? Enough said. Milton Berle may have put a television in every American home, but it was the incredible Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz that literally created the American comedy sitcom as we know it today, in front of the cameras and behind the cameras as well. The incredible, there'll never be anything else like it. I Love Lucy. Here are some I Love Lucy did you knows. Did you know that the pilot episode of I Love Lucy starred Lucy and Desi as Lucy and Larry Lopez with no Fred and Ethel Mertz as part of the show? Did you know that Lucy and Vivian Vance, who played Ethel, met only 5 days before they filmed their very first I Love Lucy episode? Did you know that in real life, Vivian Vance was 1 year older than Lucille? Vance's contract, get this, stated that Vance had to stay at least 20 pounds heavier than Lucy at all times, so she would look much older than Lucy. Did you know that Vivian Vance and William Frawley, Fred and Ethel, could not stand each other off camera? Did you know that over 1 billion people in the world today have seen at least one episode of I Love Lucy? And if you're like most of that 1 billion, you've seen more than one episode of I Love Lucy. Did you know, to that end, it has been said that Lucille Ball's face has been seen by more people than any other face in the history of the human race? Did you know that Lucille Ball was the very first female head of a major movie studio? Do you know what the name of that movie studio was? Desilu. This amazing woman once said this: "I have an everyday religion that works for me. Love yourself first, and everything else falls into line." She also said, "One of the things I learned the hard way was that it doesn't pay to get discouraged. Keeping busy and making optimism a way of life can restore your faith in yourself." She also said, "Love yourself first, and everything else falls into line. You really have to love yourself to get anything done in this world." And finally, the great Lucille Ball said this, I love this: "The secret of staying young is to live honestly, eat slowly, and lie about your age." Lucille Ball was a truly amazing woman, just as much as this great American comedian couple was an amazing couple. George Burns and, of course, the incomparable Gracie Allen. George once said, "When I was in Vegas, women were throwing their hotel keys at me, but it was after they checked out." He also said, "Happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family in another city." George also said this: "I lie a lot, but when I write about Gracie," because he wrote all of their own material, "I don't have to lie. The truth about Gracie is unbelievable enough." So here are some things that Gracie Allen was famous for saying. She once said, "When I was born, I was so surprised I didn't talk for a year and a half." She also said, "I stand before you today a simple, plain woman, which really isn't my fault. The beautician can't see me until tomorrow." Here's one routine he wrote for the two of them. George said, "Gracie, those are beautiful flowers. Where did they come from?" Gracie responds, "Don't you remember, George, you said that if I went to visit Clara Smith in the hospital, I should be sure to take her flowers. So when she wasn't looking, I did." And speaking of TV shows, did you know that this next great American comedian was born somewhere else? He was not born in America. He happened to have been born in Britain. Do you know who I'm talking about? Well, if you don't, it's the great Bob Hope. Bob Hope doesn't only have one star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame, he has no less than 4. One for motion pictures, one for the remarkable radio work he did for so many years, one for TV, I mean, that was sensational work, and one for live theater specials. Speaking of specials, See if you can guess how many Bob Hope TV specials, how many he made during his amazing years with NBC. How many do you think? How about 284? How many motion pictures did he happen to appear in? How about 60? His first picture was the big broadcast of 1938, and in it, he sings a song by the name of Thanks for the Memories. I think some of his greatest motion pictures were a series of motion pictures, the road pictures, the road to Mandalay, the road to Singapore. Incredible, incredible movies. Here are some things that Bob Hope once said. I bought a horse with 4 other guys. I don't know which of it belongs to me, but I think it's the part you don't put the $2 on. He also said a bank is a place that will lend you money if you can prove that you don't need it. Mr. Hope also said, I have a wonderful makeup crew. They're the same people restoring the Statue of Liberty. One of Bob Hope's good friends wasn't only a great American comedian, he was also famous for playing a musical instrument. As a matter of fact, he wanted to play that instrument professionally before he even thought of being a comedian, actually. What instrument did he play? Well, I'll give you a hint. Whenever you would see him play this, because it became part of his comic act, he did not play it very well. As a matter of fact, he made many of us wince. His name was Jack Benny. Here's what some other folks have said about the great Jack Benny. A New York Post newspaper critic once said this: last night, Jack Benny played Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn lost. Excuse me if I laugh at some of these, they're just way too funny. Zubin Mehta, a very famous symphony orchestra conductor, once said this: there was one especially memorable moment when Jack began a very difficult passage from Mendelssohn's concerto. Everyone in the orchestra turned and looked at Jack in wonder and amazement. They were playing Beethoven's Fifth at the time. Here's something else that the maestro Mehta once said. He once said, there's one particular moment during that concert that I shall recall as long as I live. It's when the entire audience jumped to its feet and shouted, more, more. It was right after Jack had announced that there would be a 5-minute intermission. January of 1949, great story, great true story. January of 1949, Jack was a personal friend of Harry S. Truman. And to that end, Jack served as master of ceremonies for Truman's inaugural ball. When Benny arrived at the White House gate for the event, the guards stopped him and pointed to his violin case after making Benny put down the window where he was sitting in the limousine. And the guard asked Benny, Mr. Benny, can you tell me what you have in that violin case, please? As a joke, Jack whispered back, it's a Thompson submachine gun. The guard didn't skip a moment and replied right back with this: oh, that's a relief, Mr. Benny. I was actually afraid it was your violin. My last great American comedian rose to prominence in a slightly different way than all the others. He didn't do vaudeville, he didn't do much radio, but suffice it to say that as soon as he appeared on television, his comedic fate as a legend was sealed. Who do you think that might be? He mastered his craft by imitating. And how he did that was by accents. Accents became his thing. Any guesses? It was the great Sid Caesar. And how Sid Caesar, from the incredible Your Show of Shows, uh, became famous for accents was because in high school in Yonkers, New York, his parents had a very popular dinette. And during the lunch hour, it was crazy busy. So Sid was going to high school just a few blocks away, and his parents said, Sid, don't have lunch at the high school. Come help us at the diner during your lunch break from class. And in turn, we will feed you at the dinette. Just help us clear tables. So when Sid was clearing tables, he would hear, because Yonkers to this day is an incredible melting pot of people from all around the world, different cultures, different languages. So when Sid would be bussing a table over here, he would hear Italian. When Sid would be bussing a table over there, he would hear German. And so he began, not in front of them, to imitate what he heard German to be as spoken by those people. He began to imitate what French would be, what Spanish would be, without even knowing those languages. Check out a clip on YouTube of his from your show of shows called The German General. It is absolutely amazing. And so was your show of shows. But Sid also started to play a musical instrument, just like Jack Benny did, because Jack Benny was actually a very accomplished violinist. But as part of his act, he made it seem like he couldn't play. But Sid Caesar could play and did play the saxophone, and he was very adept at playing the saxophone. And that's how he got his start. He was in different bands, but during breaks from the sets of those bands and nightclubs, he would start to do a little comic routine, and people really found him funny. Well, they found him funny for very obvious reasons, because he was funny. So eventually he made the switch from wanting to be a professional saxophonist to wanting to be a professional comedian. And I, for one, am so glad he did. He is one of my favorites. He is a genius, just like all the incredible souls we've talked about during this episode. But Sid's one big dream in life was to play saxophone with the great Benny Goodman. And if you go onto YouTube, you will see footage of that actually happening. Later in Benny's career, on live television with Benny's band, Sid got to play solo sax. And it is amazing footage. Later, Sid would say that broadcast, that evening where he played with his idol, Benny Goodman, was the greatest moment of his entire life. So we're going to close now with just a brief look at some of America's greatest comedians, truly some of America's greatest personalities. If you would like to hear an episode, a presentation about each one of the comedians mentioned during this episode, go back and do a search on this YouTube channel, Live Life Well TV, and look for, just type in Lucille Ball, type in Sid Caesar, type in Bob Hope, type in Burns and Allen, and you will find an entire episode dedicated to each one of these amazing, talented souls. We would like to thank you for joining us for this episode. This has been Robert Landau, Live Life Well TV host. Thank you so much for tuning in.